think it was originally the writers Carlos Davis and Tony Fingleton approached Rick with this idea about a woman who has this manic imaginary friend who comes back to her later in life, and it was based on a short story of a friend of theirs who's called Elizabeth. I can't remember. Livingston. There you go. And they approached Rick, who they loved. Rick loved the idea, and they got together and started writing together. Then they came, and I think probably through the good offices of Rick's agent, Ord Powell, came to Working Title, which was a very new company at the time. And I had just made a movie with Tim Bevan at Working Title called The Tall Guy, with Richard Curtis and Rowan Atkinson and Mel Smith and Emma Thompson. So Tim asked me if I wanted to be involved. There's a bit of a trick here because it's not filming in the UK, it's US set. And I said, yes, I'll go over and make the film in the US. And met with Carlos and Tony and Tim Bevan, of course, and Rick, and we all got on famously, and all we then had to do was find a director.
I went to Los Angeles, I made a lot of films in Holland. I went to Los Angeles and I sublet houses. And I sublet a house of a writer who went to Maine for 3 months. The man came back, invited his friends for a dinner, and 2 of the friends were Carlos and Tony, who I absolutely didn't know. And at that time, as you did as a young filmmaker, you gave everybody videotapes of your films. So I gave these guys videotapes of my Dutch films. But lo and behold, he actually looked at it. So a year later, I get a phone call and said, do you want to Drop That Fred? And Carlos and Tony wrote it, and I had no idea who Carlos and Tony were. But they were the guys at the dinner. And that's how it started for me. So it was an absolute break for me, to be honest.
And I seem to remember Sarah Radcliffe
had
something to do with it as well.
Yeah. Sarah at that time was still Working Title together with Tim.
It was Sarah and Tim ran Working Title.
And I don't know if Sarah had seen my films, but my first contacts were, as a producer, were with Sarah.
I remember that.
Because I had to fly to London to meet Rick, because Rick had to approve me. And then I met Sarah and all that sort of thing. I had already met Sarah. And Sarah was very involved in the beginning, and then Paul actually took over from Sarah. Took over is not the right word, but Sarah was very involved in the very setup of the film, not real casting and all that. But
putting the very basis of it together. That's right. And then I think because it was going to be an American production, I was happy to go to America to do it.
Yeah,
that became my gig.
Yeah. But if there was others, maybe you know. I'm very curious to know.
As far as I remember, you were the only director we met. But they maybe met thousands before you. Who knows?
Tim Burton, but I didn't think he was right.
Yeah, not good enough.
This way! Ow! Oh.
I would say that Rick Mayall, at the time of the making of the film, was pretty unknown in the US, apart from maybe a few comedy aficionados who knew a show called The Young Ones, which he was very, very famous for in the UK. He was huge in the UK as part of the group, and also with his comedy partner, Ade Edmondson. And they were at the forefront of the new wave of comedy through the 80s in the UK. So that broke in the US a bit later, I think, don't you think?
But certainly, I think he was already famous in Europe, because The Young Ones was shown all over Europe, and it was absolutely a hit virtually in every country, with a very specific group of people. It wasn't like, in the UK it was extremely broad. I think Rick was really a star here in his own wine. He never wanted to be a star, but he became one. And in Europe, in the more classy people knew about The Young Ones. But in America, there's a vague memory that I have that it was on MTV.
Yeah, it feels like it would be an MTV show, yeah, definitely.
There's the base! Yeah! What happened to you?
I think it was very much tailored to Rick, and actually the word tailored is maybe not even right, because Rick worked with the writers on the script. So the fact that he worked on the script with them, he made it pretty much his character and his type of acting and his persona. Let's face it, an enormous quality of the film is the performance of Rick, and because he so much made it himself, I think it's almost like he almost deserves credit for script also.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's right. We sat with Rick and Tony and Carlos reworking the script, and Rick would basically provide the comedy.
Yeah.
He would provide the gags, and Carlos and Tony would shape it narratively.
Yeah.
And then Ata would turn it into a film.
No, but if you really, it's a big jump now, but if you really look at the film, and it's all hindsight, of course, but the great quality of the film was the idea, and that was the first thing, and then it was Rick.
Yeah.
And then a long way further down, it was the making of the film. But those two things, the idea, the concept of the idea, and Rick, that really made the film.
Yeah, and I think that's right to reach back to the character from the Dangerous Brothers, which was a very, very early Rick and Aid comedy duo. That kind of absolute mania, that manic kind of craziness. In fact, the first time I saw Rick was in his very, very first show. It was a complete coincidence. I was in Edinburgh at the Fringe in 1979 with a show. And we went to see this show called Death on the Toilet. And it was Rick and Aid. And they were rehearsing their personas, which became famous over the next 30 years. So very privileged to seen Rick at the very, very beginning of his career. And of course, he was playing Death. And he came to visit a man to tell him he was going to die. And he was the Grim Reaper. And the man was deaf. So, he kept saying, I'm deaf. And the man would say, deaf? And this was Aid Emerson, deaf. And Rick would just simply say, deaf! I'm deaf! In a Cockney accent. So, and the comedy line between that and Fred is, is pretty solid.
Yeah. You always said, Paul, at that time, that Rick also had this link with the punk scene almost.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily, he was not a punk performer, but in his acting, he almost came from that corner, wasn't he?
I think so.
A very anarchistic, very no holds barred kind of a performance.
Ah! Fred! Ah! Punch me! Hey! Oh! Yeah! Hey, Fred! Ah!
Rick was, to me, and I'm blindly sure that was towards Paul also. Actually, that distinction is not that big. It sounds like Paul was always there on the set. Was always there at present. So he had as much to do with Rick as I did. But Rick was very loyal, which is a great thing. And Rick always said, look, as an actor, as a comic actor, the one thing you have to have is trust. So he trusted me, he trusted Paul, he certainly trusted Phoebe. And that loyalty, he always said, no, I'll follow you from here to Stalingrad. And that kind of loyalty made it very pleasant. He was a person who, he was willing to try everything as long as you respected his input, which we did, because God, we would be stupid not to. So I can't say anything but the most kind things. I wish I could find something that was not nice, but just for the fun of it. But I really don't know. I really have no negative memories
I
whatsoever.
can't remember any conflicts on set at all.
No.
Between you guys at all the actors.
No.
I think it was very, it's a terribly bland thing to say, but it was very, very smooth.
We could harpoon Charles straight through the head, drag him back to the apartment, and then hit him with the hammer till he agrees to come back.
Harpoon him through the head.
Yeah, it's a brilliant plan.
Carlos and Tony were intimately involved with the film from start to finish, which is unusual to have a writer there on set the whole time. But because the comedy of the story was always evolving, and it was a pretty tight schedule, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And things changed a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
We did do some rewriting as we went along.
Yeah.
So they had something to do, they had a job. It kind of was their project, It came out of their imaginations. And that was honoured by Working Title, by ourselves, and by Rick. Rick was very close to them. So they were there the whole time. And my memory is it was pretty easy. I don't know if you had a hard time.
Not at all. I found them very collaborative. The one little thing I remember which is funny now is that they had written the script. Carrie Fisher was one of the actors, and Carrie has written quite a lot also and is very funny also. And she sometimes rewrote her dialogue a little bit.
Right.
And I remember that Tony not always liked that.
Yeah.
But it worked. And that was then
right.
the only thing that counted for us. If it works, it works.
He's such an animal.
You mean he goes all night?
No, what do you think I mean? He shits in the corner, he eats with his paws.
Again, it's a long time ago. I remember us casting
Yeah.
for quite a while.
Yeah.
We met quite a few actresses,
Yeah.
did we not?
Yes.
And I think we were pretty unified in our liking of Phoebe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I think there was that honesty and sweetness
Yes.
and the comic timing that came
Yeah.
to the fore from the very instant. She kind of understood what it was about.
All of the above, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do remember exactly what you said. The strange thing was, Rick was a given.
Yeah.
And the part of Phoebe, Lizzie, was not a given. So we did need a number of actresses. For instance, like Carrie Fisher, we also met her for the lead part. And then it was clear because Carrie was a little bit older, it wasn't
Yeah.
really the right character for it and all
That's
that.
right.
And so then she got the other part as the best friend and all that. But we did meet quite a number of actresses. Not like in screen test, but we literally sat down like we sit now, we talked. And
Yeah.
you see at a certain point if you can imagine an actress playing that part, if she fits the part. And it's exactly as Paul said. She sat there and she had the charm and the sweetness and the kindness. And at the same time, you felt that she had a secret that she was unable to express unless she matured a bit. And so she was the right person.
Oh, I should never have let my mother know how much she could hurt me. Once she knew how, she knew that she could do it all the time. And she did.
And in order to get the movie green lit, you know, casting is very, very important, you know. This was one of Polygram's first films.
Yeah.
And which is a big company in the 90s. We had to get a few names, and Phoebe had a name from Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah. Gremlins had she also done?
Gremlins, absolutely, she'd done that, and that was probably her biggest
Yeah.
hit. So she helped, because Rick, you know, in terms of putting an American movie together was not helpful, because he was an unknown. And then it was just putting the rest of the cast around them, and they wanted substantial names, but nobody was looking for big stars for the other characters. But it helped that Tim Matheson came on board, did it
Yeah.
not? Do you remember?
Yeah.
You know, because of Animal House
Yeah.
and so on. So there was some comedy chops in the cast.
Marsha Mason.
Marsha
Who was an Oscar-winning actress.
Yeah, exactly. And Carrie helped as well.
Absolutely.
Small role, but
Yeah.
you know, Princess Leia.
Yeah, it's,
So,
still,
you know.
it's still a pity. I'm not sure if you remember that, Paul, but in one of the shots, she actually, when she looks at Fred laying there, who wasn't there, of course, because he's imaginary, she said, "May the force be with you." We all loved it, but it didn't end up in the film because
No.
I think everybody was afraid for copyright issues.
Something like that.
Don't you feel better?
No.
Phoebe, after Drop Dead Fred, or not long after Drop Dead Fred, she actually had children together with Kenneth Klein. And Phoebe basically said, "I'll take care of the children," and stopped her career, which is, on the one hand, a fantastic thing to do as a parent, and it's a little bit of pity for her as an actress. But she accepted that, and that's the way it went. Carrie Fisher, of course, that's pretty clear. Carrie did a lot of different things. She had a lot of outspoken presence in the press, you know, because of postcards from the Edge, because of other things. She comes, of course, from Hollywood royalty, you know, with Max Fisher and Debbie Reynolds are her parents. So she has a very special position in Hollywood. Always gave the biggest parties. I'm not sure if you've ever been there, Paul. She gave these enormous, lavish parties where you have to have won an Oscar, otherwise you wouldn't be invited. I think I was the only one, and the Mexican waitresses who had no Oscar, but all the rest had. And then, of course, you know, she came back as Princess Leia again, which is phenomenal. Tim Madison, to be honest, I don't really know. I don't really know.
Yeah, he's
how
had a
his career
very
went.
good career. He's a very solid career. He's still acting today. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Marsha too, I believe.
Marsha too, yeah. Marsha is I found Marsha fantastic as an actress. I
Yeah.
really thought she was a little bit more. She approached it slightly more as a theatre actress. Not that she's theatrical, not at all. But she was very respectful towards the script and towards the dialogue, which generally theatre actors are. While Phoebe, for instance, because Phoebe is really a film actress, was more liberal, was more free. And Rick, of course, completely. Rick could improvise at your heart's content.
And we'll poo her all over the table, because we're not afraid of anything. Yeah! Yeah! Yeah!
Ashley Peldon,
The little girl.
the little girl.
Ashley must be a beautiful young woman now.
She must be in her 30s, I would think.
Yeah, she was probably like 5, 6.
No, I think she was a little older. She
at
looked
the time
younger.
that we shot?
Yeah, I believe she was about 7 or 8. She was
Okay.
already a veteran of Days of Our Lives.
Wow. So 7, 8,
so-
so indeed she must be like 33, 34 now.
Yeah, something like that. Did she have fun? What do you think?
I certainly remember her as having a lot of fun and pleasure and not being a film young actress that is snotty and doesn't know what happened. She really seemed to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I remember her mother, who was a very down-to-earth woman and was helpful there and made sure that things didn't go wrong and that she stayed grounded. I have very good memories about it.
And Rick was very good with her.
Yes,
He's
yes.
fantastically good with children. And
Yeah.
I think that chemistry between them was very real. Before and on camera, it was the same. I mean, he really worked very hard with her. We had night scenes with her. Had
Yeah.
to work her all night. God knows
Yeah.
how we managed to do that.
Probably wouldn't be allowed anymore.
Wouldn't be allowed anymore, I'm sure. But but she was a lovely girl and
She was
very,
actually
very,
very
very
nice, and her
good
mother
actress.
also. And I remember that, for instance, like the first line. I remember more the first line when she says the mother tells Marcia Mason tells the fairy tale, and she says, "What a pile of shit," and she did it with a gusto and pleasure.
Yeah.
And I remember some of the crew said, "Oh, you can't have a child say that," but she didn't seem to have a problem with it.
No.
What a pile of shit.
Just like you cast actors, you cast directors of photography. We had met Peter, Paul, and I. I still see us sitting at that couch there somewhere in the, I'm not sure if the Hollywood Hills, but somewhere
Beechwood
there.
Canyon.
Beechwood Canyon, that was
Yeah.
it. We were sitting there, and Peter was sitting there, and he barely said a word.
That's right.
So Paul said, "This man is fantastic." And I said, "Yeah, but he doesn't communicate." So I was very careful. And we went with another DP.
That's right.
And we were shooting, and it was absolutely a mistake, the other DP.
Yeah.
It didn't, we made like 3 shots a day. Every shot had to be a phenomenal Oscar-winning shot, which they were not. And we didn't get what we needed to have. So after a week, Paul and I said to each other, "This doesn't work." So of course, but it's not an easy thing to fire a DP. But
That's very
ultimately, Paul had the guts to do it, and which I still think we should all thank God on our knees that we did. And Paul brought Peter back, and it was a delight. So okay, it was my mistake that I thought we couldn't communicate, but we could. I still am in touch with him. He's a
Me too.
fantastic DP.
Works with David Lynch. He
A lot,
just
yeah.
shot the new Twin Peaks with David.
Yeah,
So he works with Lynch a lot. He's a great DP.
yeah. At that time, you didn't really depend that much on CGI yet. We have few CGI things, like when Rick comes out of the box, you have the ball bouncing around.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's one of the few
Very
things.
basic stuff,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
But-
25 years ago. No,
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
26, 27
Yeah.
years ago. Yeah.
But we basically tried to solve everything with mechanical solutions.
My favourite memory was the mud pie scene, which was, for some reason, Arthur decided he wanted the mud pies to bubble. And I said, "Mud pies don't bubble." And he said, "I'm going to do it anyway." So there were these fake mud pies with air pipes,
Yeah.
compressed air pipes, that pumped air in to make them bubble. And the first take, I think it was, what happened was that the mud dried in the pipe.
Oh, God.
And the special effects guy forced it through, and the pie exploded, covering everybody in mud, right? And landed on one of the props, one of the paintings on the wall. And the prop guy, or the set decorator, went, "That's a real painting. That's worth $100,000." And screaming. He hadn't told anybody. We hadn't insured it or anything. And this painting was covered in this fake mud. And then we set it up again, and the poor old special effects guy was doing it, and it backfired, but he didn't want to, do you remember this? He didn't want to stop the shot, and the mud was just pumping all over him, and he was just standing there looking absolutely miserable with this mud backfiring all over him. It was brilliant. It was my favourite memory of shooting.
I had not a strong memory of this, but now it comes. The one thing, of course, I have to say now, in this vein, is my mother is in the film.
Of course.
And my mother is in the film. She's the old lady in the beginning who gets the paint, the bucket of paint on her. And my mother, my mother was alone. My father had died by then, and she wanted to come, but she coming from the background I come from, she couldn't come just to be there. She had to do something. She had to have a purpose to come. So I said, well, we'll find a small part for you. And so that was about the only thing. And the whole crew said, you can't really throw paint on your mother. You can't do that. And poor woman, the bucket. The bucket became bigger and bigger, by the way.
Of course it did.
And at a certain point, I thought, oh, this, why can't we do this? And it's much cheaper than 10 therapy sessions. So ultimately, we threw this whole paint, which was yogurt with a color, with a yellow color on her. And she had to scream. Of course, she couldn't do it because she's not an actress at all. She couldn't do that. She said, something like that. That was about all we got out of her. And then the only thing she complained about, she said, well, next time I should have something in my ear, because like 6 months later was still like yellow yogurt coming out of her ear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I tortured my mother. That's basically the story.
That's all you need to know about Arthur and his relationship with his parents.
Yes. We had a mega bitch in the film.
That's right.
And we could only have that once, because
That's
I was
right.
like in the film 3 or 4 times. or
Yeah.
something. And then it changed to a little bit to Rick's dismay. He changed it into Mega Beast. So we have
That's
one Mega
right.
Bitch and the rest are Mega Beasts.
The mega bitch squashed my head!
And for instance, once Rick spits on the head of
That's right.
Phoebe, and the spit was a bit too disgusting. And also like Rick once pulled his nose and plop, and it goes into the cup, the coffee cup of Marcia. And I'm not sure if that's still in, because I feel that the plopping into the cup had to go out also.
Yeah, I think so too.
Who's for snot flicking?
So there's a number of things that they
Kind
thought
of
was a touch.
scatological stuff.
Yeah, it was a bit too disgusting. But the poo on the feet is still in.
Yeah, which thank God for that, because
Yeah.
that's one of the most successful
Yeah,
scenes.
yeah.
I bet if you made the film today, they'd be asking you for more stuff. I bet you it's true.
Yeah. Now the great thing about the finding back the rough cut, which Carlos had, is that the whole drop that fret land scene is in there.
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
like a 6-7 minute scene that's completely omitted from the film, which makes sense because the film started to lag a little bit
Yeah,
there.
it did.
But now in the retrospect, it's a great scene to have.
Pretty Bill!
The film did phenomenally well in the US. The proof of that is like they first were going to release the film in 150 prints, then did a test release. It did so well in the test release that overnight they decided to go to 815, became like 930
That's right.
prints. And also the P&A budget moved from 1.5 million to, I believe, 7.5 million, which was more than the budget of the film. And it did really great at it. I think we were at number 3 in the Variety top
Yeah, I think
list.
we were.
The UK I have less knowledge of because I
Yes.
didn't live here. So
My memory is it did okay. I don't think it did that well. I think overall it didn't, outside of the US, it did quite well in Australia.
Yeah.
You know that, did well in Australia. But beyond that, it didn't really play internationally that well, initially, on the theatrical release at least.
But the strange thing is the film, which we absolutely never expected, and you can't think of that, but the film gathered a following, which went on and on and on and is still going on.
Still goes on. Yeah, I think the film really found a very, very loyal following and continued to do so because the video release was very successful. And then it went on and on into DVD and Blu-ray and so on, and the life of the film has continued and continued on cable in the States. And the proof positive of that is the way it's kind of it's filtered into the zeitgeist, into the culture.
It sounds weird, and I'm very proud of the film, but it is one of the films I made. It's a very special film, and I adore it. But there's other films I adore also. And still, but other people have made this film into a very special event. And you shouldn't forget that, sometimes we tend to, maybe I tend to be a little bit cavalier about the film, like, oh, it's just a funny film and Rick is fantastic, which he is, by the way. But it has an underlayer. There's an underlayer in that film of a young girl that needs to escape from her past, from the things that happen in the past. It's never spoken about, but there's a very serious underlayer that supports the comic.
Yeah.
And that, I think, makes the film different from other films, because you have a lot of funny films, but there's another layer to it that makes it special.
And that notion of the inner child,
Yeah.
you know, that the adult has to look after is very au courant in contemporary psychotherapy
Yeah.
and psychiatry.
Yeah.
The film has been used in child psychology courses.
Yeah.
We know that it's kind of gone into that world, and its underlying psychological truth is pretty robust, I think. You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's I think that's why, as Arthur says, the comedy works, because it has a basis in real psychological truth.
Yeah, I just read the film has just been shown again in Harvard, in a special Harvard site, and somebody, I think a psychologist, wrote a whole essay about the film and actually brought these elements out. The Jungian, the Freudian, all these things, which we were very cautious with, but we were aware of that, but we were cautious with it, and
Sure.
we didn't play on it.
Yeah.
But it's there, and I do think that helped the quality of the film enormously.
Oh, I know what you're doing. You're going to do what he did to Annabella on the sofa.
Don't say things like that now, Fred.
I think it's time to say goodbye to your friend.
One of the things that is amazing, I think, is that nobody has made an imaginary friend film since Drop Dead Fred. You know, why? It seems such rich territory. You know, I know there was a Barry Levinson script around for a long time about very similar. There's been, and there was talks about remaking Drop Dead Fred.
A
with
lot of
Russell,
talk about
Russell
that.
Brand.
Yeah.
Tony and Carlos and Rick and I began working on a sequel idea a few years back, and nothing came of that. There was an attempt at a sequel with a
Jim Carrey?
Jim Carrey, you know, Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey was going to do a sequel.
Was rumoured to do the sequel for a while, stuff like that. But nothing has happened.
No.
And it's the only movie out there that deals with this, you know, essential part of childhood in a very comic way. And I think one of the reasons this film is so durable is that extraordinary performance from Rick. You know, that's a very memorable character.
Yeah.
You know, beautifully supported by Phoebe. You know, the ordinariness and sweetness of Phoebe.
Yeah.
Perfectly juxtaposed with the mania of Rick, which I think was his best iteration on film. Don't
Yeah.
you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. In person, on TV, he's fantastic as well. But this was his triumph on film.
Yeah.
It is a lovely day for it.
The death breath. She killed me with the death breath.
From my side, there were no real plans to work again. Not that I didn't want to, but the plans didn't exist. Was it a shock? Yeah, of course, it's always a shock. But at the same time, it was for me not totally unexpected. You know, Rick had an accident. He had a frail health to some degree, which we all knew. And though nobody saw this coming, at the same time, the fact that it happened was a little bit in the cards. I mean, it's still shocking, and it's a big loss. But you have to put it in perspective that he had this horrible accident a few years after the Drop Dead Fred, which curtailed his career to a large degree because he couldn't work in the same level anymore as he did before, which was a big shame because he had so much in him still. And then later it came back to a certain level, but he couldn't really work at the same energy level anymore as he did before.
Yeah, it was very shocking. It was terribly sad when Rick passed away. It felt like an end of an era in a way, not least because a comic colleague of a little bit older, but of the same era was Mel Smith. And Mel Smith passed away around the same time, who, ironically, I'd worked with immediately before Drop Dead Fred. Mel directed The Tall Guy. So it felt like a real passing of a great beginning of the passing of a great era of comedy in the UK.
Your stupid, ugly, fat, grown-up husband has left you, so you're all alone and you're all unhappy. So I had to come back and I can't get home again until you're happy. So why don't you get happy?
Well, the film is certainly, I mean, it's a bit sentimental, but it is a testament to Rick. And so in retrospect, it is fantastic that it has happened. In a strange way, he will live on through this film, also through The Young Ones and some other stuff, of course, because many things he did were brilliant. But film has a special place in the world as such. So the film will travel to other countries, will be remembered in a different way. I can only say I have the most fond memories of everything of that film. I find myself to be almost like strangely lucky that I've been part of it. That it's something that fell in my lap almost, and I can only be very grateful that I was allowed to be a part of it. Do you remember this kitchen block?
No.
This is the kitchen block that is in Drop Dead Fred.
Okay.
And at one point, I think the scene has been cut. Fred actually lies on the kitchen block.
I remember that.
And totally curled up in a fetus sort of position, fetal position.
Yeah.
Because he's being phased out. And,
Oh, that's right.
And before that, Lizzie is actually making a wonderful salad for her husband on this kitchen block. After the film was finished, they sell off the props. I bought this from the production.
And then you shipped it back.
I shipped it back to
You
London.
didn't just go around the corner and buy.
First the block stood for like 4 or 5 years in Hollywood because I lived there. And then I came to London and I met Libby and I started to live here and I shipped it to here and it's still in use. Now it's not mine anymore, but
That's okay.
it is the Drop Dead Fred kitchen block.
Well, there you go. How about that? That's amazing.